If you've been coming to PCC students for any length of time, you've heard every single teaching pastor talk about mission trips and the impact that they've had on our lives. It's completely fair to say that we love them and wouldn't be the people we are today without them. And I know that's true for many of you listening to me right now. Shameless plug, by the way, we've got one coming up in June. So if you haven't signed up yet, make it a priority to do so. Because I have a strong feeling that this year is going to be one of them ones that we're not going to forget soon for all the best reasons. So talk to your student coordinator, your small group leader. They will point you in the right direction. But like I mentioned, we talk about them a lot because we have been changed by them. Partnering with God in His work to help others in need, partnering with you and getting to know you better, spending time in passionate worship with this whole crew. I mean, it really doesn't get any better than that. And at this point, I believe I've crossed the 30 mark on how many mission trips I've gone on since I was your age. Many times I've spent my entire summer going on 2 or 3 of them in a single season. And I've had the privilege of traveling around the U.S. and really the whole world, following God on these trips, and I have absolutely no plans of ever stopping. With all that said, there is one aspect of these trips that we almost never talk about. Can you guess what it is? I'll give you a hint. Unless it's a complete disaster, you almost never hear us mention it at all. Do you know? It's the travel. It is exceedingly rare that anyone who thinks about the mission trip actually considers the journey and the time it took to get there. Again, unless we blew a tire or a flight got massively delayed, or, we lost a student at a rest stop, which, okay, calm down. I can count on one hand how many times that's happened, all right? Rest in peace, Samantha, or whatever her name was. Unless something like that happens, we don't ever talk about the trip there and back. Our memories focus exclusively on the event itself. When we think about mission trips, we jump straight to the work site in our mind, the gym where we spent free time, the auditorium where we worshiped, the summer camp that we got to hold for the kids, all of that. And fair enough. Oftentimes the journey to and from a mission trip is uneventful and pretty forgettable. So I don't see a massive problem with this. The driving or the riding itself for mission trips is really just a means to an end. But there is a problem with that general line of thinking, because it's not just the mission trips we do this with. We also do it with Jesus, specifically our relationship with Jesus. If you're new to faith, but you're intrigued by a relationship with Him, you probably, maybe, have grand thoughts in your head already about what it could be. Maybe there's joy and happiness, contentment, and love waiting for me if I just decide to follow Him. You've heard the stories that I've told, Ellis, Lindsay, Mackenzie, all of us have told. You've listened as we've talked about all the amazing ways Jesus has moved in our lives. And so now you think that if you decide to follow Jesus, all of that is going to be yours and it's going to happen right away. On the flip side, many of you here have already decided to follow Jesus, but you're starting to think, I don't know about this. I thought it was going to be fun. It sounded exciting. I was hopeful, but I don't feel much of that at all. Is something wrong with me? Is God actually interested in a relationship with me? Because you've heard the stories too, and you've actually made the effort to see for yourself, only to come up empty. Wherever you are, there is a risk, and it's this. You can easily be convinced that Jesus and faith in Jesus is something that it's not, because you're neglecting the journey toward Jesus. You're neglecting or not thinking about the time it takes to know Jesus. And this is the truth. The richness of a relationship with Jesus is almost always found in the ritual of investing in that relationship. Let me say that again. The richness of a relationship with Jesus is almost always found in the daily ritual of investing in that relationship. A fulfilled life, a content life with Jesus, it's less of a sudden Coke and Mentos reaction and more of a slow, winding journey of time. That is the real catalyst for a life that truly matters. examples of people in the Bible highlighting the importance of spending time with God in order to have a fuller relationship with God. But it doesn't really take a rocket scientist to uncover that mystery, does it? It would be like suggesting that you and your best friend should spend more time together if you wanted to get closer. Yeah, obviously. You only got to be best friends because you put in the time. You went on the friendship journey together, as it were, and over time became better and better friends the more and more you learned about one another. But somehow, many of us don't consider that we're going to have to do that same thing with Jesus if we're going to get closer to him too. It's true that he already knows everything about us, but we certainly don't know everything about him, and we never will if we don't put in the time to learn. But this wasn't so with Joshua. Many years before Jesus came to earth, Joshua, son of Nun, and that's N-U-N, not N-O-N-E, he somehow knew that if he was going to become the person God made him to be, he'd have to prioritize his time spent with God to get there. Now, if you don't know, this guy Joshua, he was Moses' protege, his understudy. He was tapped to lead God's people after Moses eventually peaced the sea. He got this assignment when he was still a teenager, though, when he was your age. So it would be decades before he actually took over from Moses. So what did he do in the meantime? I imagine that getting to spend so much time with Moses would get you really amped up for the future. I mean, Moses and God were legit tight. All right, the Bible tells us on multiple occasions that the Lord knew Moses face to face. I mean, does it get any closer to God than that? Joshua could have easily believed that he'd be just as close with God because of how close he was with Moses. I mean, if he's the next Moses, then surely God would treat him with the same respect. That's probably what I would assume anyway. But Joshua didn't think like that. Instead, the Lord would speak to Moses face to face as one speaks to a friend, what we just talked about. But then Moses would return to the camp, but his young aide Joshua, son of Nun, did not leave the tent. Do you see this? This verse in context, it kind of feels like an afterthought, honestly. In Exodus 33, there's a lot going on with the Israelites, and for all intents and purposes, this whole chapter, really the whole book of Exodus, is about how God is using Moses specifically to lead his people. And then right there at the end of this chapter, Joshua gets mentioned. And what is he doing? Spending time with God. When Moses, who would speak to God face to face, or it was like face to face, when he was done and he returned to the camp, he called it a day, Joshua stayed behind. He did not leave the presence of God. Why? Because he knew the richness of a relationship with God is almost always found in the ritual of investing in that relationship. He knew that if he had any hope of being the leader he had already been called to be, then he needed to know the one who called him, the one who was going to lead him as well as he could before that ever happened. So that way he'd recognize God's voice when God was finally ready to use him. He'd be able to tell what God wanted him to do and what decisions he should make because he spent the time learning those things before he was up to bat. When there was no obligation to do so, Joshua stayed behind in the presence of God anyway. And when it was finally his time, he was ready. We're of course not going to read this, but there's a whole book named after Joshua, and in it, it talks about his exploits. He would go on to become the person to lead God's people into the promised land. By the way, something Moses couldn't do, something Jacob couldn't do, something Isaac couldn't do, something Abraham never did. He would lead the assault against the impenetrable walls of Jericho, bringing them down without a single weapon being drawn. Joshua would go on to lead the conquest of the entire area that is now modern-day Israel. And of all the heroes in the Bible who do amazing things and terrible things, the Bible doesn't have a single negative word to say about Joshua. How did he get there? He did not neglect his time spent with God. And if you want to be everything God made you to be, you can't neglect it either. See, you probably already know this, but we've been raised in a culture that wants everything at the sound of our call. Is it going to take longer than 2-day Amazon Prime shipping? I don't want it. Is my phone taking a few extra seconds to open this app or load this page? I'll come back later. Why hasn't my friend responded to my text or my snap? I sent it a minute ago. They're leaving me on red. Are they mad at me? What did I do to upset them? We do this with God too. I asked God to speak to me before bed last night. I prayed, but I woke up today and I don't feel different, so God doesn't listen to me. I was told that if I followed Jesus, I'd find joy in my life. And I got baptized in September believing that, but I don't feel it. I'm still dealing with the same old crap. Maybe what they say isn't true after all. We want the end result before experience the catalyst that was designed to bring it about. Time spent with God. We expect the instant gratification without the continuous satisfaction of simply being with Jesus through prayer, through reading our Bible, through worshiping, and through speaking with others. And if we keep operating that way, we will never have a complete relationship with Him, which is going to eventually lead to discontentment, resentment, and eventually no desire to go on at all. But it doesn't have to be that way. Joshua shows us that a small, regular investment now can and will bring out a major change in the future. Maybe that change inside of you or in your circumstance, maybe it's just around the corner. And I really hope it is. But maybe like Joshua, your moment is decades away. Either way, what I want you to realize is that the end goal, whatever it is you're hoping for, it's really not the goal at all, at least not completely. See, because the journey toward that goal is what's going to change you. And so by the time you get to whatever it is, whatever God has for you, you'll be the person that's ready for it. If you invest the time now, you'll be ready. A few years ago, I wrote a spoken word, sort of a poetry piece about Joshua and his time spent with God. And I thought to end our time together, I would deliver it to you in hopes that you can be inspired by this short verse, Exodus 33:11, in the same way I was years ago. You and I can truly live our fullest lives possible in Jesus as long as we're willing to invest the time. Something we all try to make, stop, kill, and save. We believe there's never enough of it, time. A friend recently told me that not using it to be productive, to get things done, felt a little destructive to her. Does that resonate with anyone? Most of us agree that never wasting a moment or using our time wisely will make us shine most brightly, buy us the happiness and comfort we all covet so highly, and set us up to be good so by the time we're 90, everything's as it should be. How come then do we spend this precious commodity on things that are so obviously useless? I understand. We all have a million tasks the day brings. Listening out for our annoying phone, that rings a bell. Did I catch up on the last season of Stranger Things? Heard it really pulls the heartstrings. Wait. I'm getting distracted from the main thing. How is it that when we finally take a moment to make time for the King of Kings, well, that cycle keeps pulling us back, doesn't it? Time. We all wish we could somehow store more of it, but we can't go to the drugstore and order it, so worrying about how to hoard it isn't worth pouring more thought into it. So the question becomes, how do we invest it properly? With no wiggle room in our airtight schedules, how can God's truth trickle into our souls where it ought to be? Time. When we read Exodus 33, we get a picture of how things could be from the example of a young man who's not even in his 20s. In what many of us might consider a throwaway sentence, the Bible takes us to a faraway entrance. Moses and Joshua are in the tent of meeting, a jerry-rigged contraption where God's convening with man happens. After God is finished speaking and Moses begins retreating, we see one human being stay behind, Joshua. Let's take a look and see the 11th verse of chapter 33. Thus the Lord used to speak to Moses face to face as one speaks to a friend. Then Moses would return to the camp, but his young assistant, Joshua, son of Nun, would not leave the tent. It's funny. The Bible doesn't need to rhyme in order to get its point across. Contained within these pages is a lifetime of wisdom at literally no cost. Joshua recognized that the presence of God was too good to be denied. He stayed behind after the chime on his allotted time went off. The scripture says he would not leave, suggesting that any sort of reprieve would be too hard to conceive. The Son of None wouldn't let anyone pull him away from the creator of the sun, the most deserving one of his time. Later in his life, Joshua goes on to lead his friends and neighbors, stowaways and strangers into God's promised land. By faith, he walked around a giant wall, 46 feet tall, and watched it fall, all while preventing swords from being drawn. Additionally, he told the sun to stop above Gibeon, which sounds like a 1 in a million to us mere civilians. But God held it high in the sky at the request of this Joshua guy. Why? Time. Joshua spent his time learning to hear from the Most High, so when it was showtime, he already knew his master's voice. And it's here, within this short story from yesteryear, that we find the truth we all need to hear. Don't steer clear of uninterrupted time with God. Take a moment today, or dare I say every day, to simply sit and stay in God's presence. While you might feel like you're sitting in silence and wondering if the time spent or prime minutes you could be doing something else, just listen up. Pray to God that he would show up, speak to you in ways that make you say, okay, God, don't hang up. I'm listening and learning, seeking and discerning everything you need me to build up in here. If you and I are able to become more faithful and not be wasteful of the gift we can never get back, then we'll see that someday, maybe close or far away, that God is going to use us in a mighty way, just like he did Joshua. So let's commit and not be afraid of it, time spent with God. Because someday we'll see, through God's process of refining you and me, that we're becoming who we were always meant to be, if we'll simply take, well, you know.